Well, man, it's great to meet you. I'm looking forward to getting into the book. Thank you for
Thank
taking
you.
a minute out today.
Sure, my pleasure.
So, talk to me a little bit about how this book came about. You know, anytime you hop into an endeavor like this, especially in jazz, there's volumes and volumes and timelines, and it's like you're on the top of the Sears Tower looking down on this enormous swath of activity. How do you funnel all that into something digestible, understandable, and energizing for the reader?
Well, in this case, the book began with the Jazz Journalists Association membership. We had a online event 3 years ago in which we interviewed two publishers about and editors about upcoming books and the state of book publishing. And I liked what one of them had to say. I liked what both of them had to say, but one of them seemed to have a business model that could work for the JJA to create an anthology of our members' works. And that was really the focus. We have 250 members right now. It's an international organization of people using media to support jazz. Writers, photographers, broadcasters, videographers, and other new media professionals. So it was easy. We put out a call for people to send us three versions of their best works from the last 20 years.
Wow.
We were incorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit in 2003. And so it was going to be an anniversary present to the Jazz Journalists Association to have a book out. It would represent our membership. It would look back at 20 years of jazz coverage across the world. And there was nothing like it. We thought
Yeah.
it was a good idea.
Yeah, it is a great idea. You know, the thing about jazz, being in the jazz journalism world, it's like when I look, for instance, sports we brought up. When I look at sports, I'm like, it's so oversaturated. The questions are always the same. There's something about it where I feel like the athletes would be so happy if they would walk into a press room and have like two people in there. Two very dedicated people. But I feel like with jazz, especially, they are very receptive and very appreciative of this work that's being done about, keeping this art form alive and really, because anybody that's involved with jazz, it's not about the money. It's about the heart and soul. It's about something stronger and deeper that holds us on this planet. So my question to you is this: in that venture of doing this, what did you learn about being a journalist, about covering this art form? What revelations were new to you?
Well, I've been doing this for 50 years, so I have an overview of jazz journalism. But it was emphasized to me how many different ways there are to cover jazz: reviews, interviews, overviews, revisionary thinking about the music, scene setting. So that was one thing, the amount of variety that texts about jazz can produce. The decentralization of jazz, I think, is an important theme that comes up throughout the book. I mean, there's jazz everywhere. And, compared to football, where you've got, NFL teams, professional teams that really have major focus on them. And what is there, 15 teams, 20 teams?
Yeah.
Um, we have thousands of jazz scenes all around the world,
Yeah.
and we need to have reporters on the ground kind of observing those scenes, part of them embedded really, and reporting to us. And it's just vast. So that was emphasized by getting this book together too.
So, like, and I'm asking this because I'm curious from my standpoint. I tend to be an independent kind of guy. I mean, a lot of what I do is dispersed through All About Jazz and the web, and I'm on some terrestrial stations, but I've primarily done this on my own. I've been my own editor. I haven't had anybody tell me you can't release this. So my question to you is this: the backbone of jazz is freedom. And a part of that freedom I feel covering this art form. When you look at the spectrum of everybody in the association, how many are independent and how many are tethered to something that would give them editorial oversight with the material you get?
Well, I think that the majority of JJA members are freelancers and independent contractors.
Yeah.
And of course, they have some longstanding connections to certain platforms or publications, which offer some editorial guidance or oversight. But for the most part, we operate independently. I mean, I come up with ideas that I want to cover, and I float them by editors at Downbeat or The Wire, and if they don't like them, I'll go to my Substack or my blog on Arts Journal. So
Yeah.
I have options that way. This is different than it used to be when I got into this world. There were many more people who actually worked full time for newspapers or magazines um, as staff writers. This has diminished certainly in the last 30 years. And now I think most of us are doing our own captaining.
Yeah. Well, I just got a book in the mail the other day that it's about a radio broad jazz radio, and it's starting in the beginnings and kind of going through it. And I've read the preface and the intro, and I'm just sinking my teeth into it. And it's interesting already about the trends that are going into that. How many flagship stations? Like you got the WBGOs, you got the K Jazzes in LA, KCSM, you got these big, huge flagship stations. But for instance, in Kansas City, there's no dedicated station. We're one of the original cradles of jazz in the world, and we don't have a dedicated station. We don't have anywhere near a dedicated station. We have hours and slices of hours that exist out there. So my question to you is this: being in this for 50 years, being in this for a long time, what kind of changes have you seen that have been detrimental to the state of what's going on with jazz? But conversely, what have been beneficial to kind of rise against that tide of the absence of maybe broadcasting?
Well, yeah, it's a double-edged sword. One of the things that's been detrimental has been sort of the collapse of record companies uh, to a large degree. They were funding a lot of the ecosystem that has promoted jazz. I mean, advertisements from record companies going to publications, for instance.
Yeah,
Um, Although that has been kind of sad to see Columbia and Warner Brothers and Verve uh, diminish their profiles, if not end action all completely. At the same time, it's given rise to a lot of independent record labels all over the country that are focused on their own scenes. And I have to think that the decentralization is a good thing.
yeah.
Um, so that primarily, as I was speaking before about the reduction of publishing platforms that jazz journalists can be gainfully employed with, we do have the freedom of putting up our own material
Yeah.
and doing it ourselves, and that's a nice thing. I'm not sure how effective it is. There are a lot of voices now in criticism, journalism, influencing, lobbying, public relations, promotion. It's kind of hard to filter through them all. But I think that the avid and devoted listener will look carefully for the voices that seem instructive, enlightening, um, provocative. They really provide substantial information
But
and a way to talk about this music.
for sure. But I think the interesting thing about what's going on now, it's like when you see a podcast that's doing really well, there's this democracy that goes into it. If it's good, if it's legit, if they feel like it's coming from the right place, you're going to get people that are going to click and link, and it's going to be legit. But getting back to that whole label thing that you're talking about, I was thinking about all the labels like Cellar Live and Sunnyside and Shifting Paradigm and all of these. And from my perspective, I get a lot of CDs in the mail and a lot of correspondence. They really feel like they're doing things in a robust way to get these musicians out there. I really feel like, I mean, it's not the Verve and Blue Notes, but I think that like you said, it's given way to these independent labels that are focusing on their regions. Like Shifting Paradigm is up in Minneapolis. Cellar Live is by Corey Weeds up there in Canada. And it's like, it seems like they're really kind of honing in and they're doing a really good job of it.
I think so. Origin is one in the Pacific Northwest.
Yep,
Delmark here in Chicago. Uh, Smoke in New York.
sure.
Yeah, but it's hard. It's difficult. A lot of these independent labels are also run by musicians. Musicians should be spending their time composing and practicing and making music.
Yes.
Do we really want them sitting behind desks, sending out billing invoices and stuff like this? Is that the best use of their time? I don't know. Every, everybody in the arts has to do everything now,
Yeah.
from the bottom up, from sharpening your pencils to going to the Grammys. I mean, it's just a complete immersion in the profession as it is in the life.
Yeah, which I think to a certain degree would probably lend to a level of burnout for some people. I think that's the thing I realized during that COVID time period. I expected a lot more musicians to possibly not come back to the business, to completely change course. I mean, it's just like you said, it's absolute insanity that you have to do everything from the top down.
Well, certainly one of the lessons of the 67 chapters in the Jazz Omnibus is that these people do not give up. You
Yeah,
know, that people want to play this music and they're going to find a way to do that.
yeah.
And other people want to hear it and they're going to find a way to listen. Um, uh, One of the things I love most about jazz is that it is not dependent upon the financial ins and outs of our society. It is self-sustaining despite slings and arrows that are coming from financial ecosystem all the time. It's always been that way, like really since the 1920s. Uh, People have found a way to promote the music that they want to hear and they want to play and that they want to attend to. It's a whole interaction. And it is not dependent upon economic support. As you said, it is dependent upon devotion, enthusiasm, like a heart feeling that this music really pays off. It gives us something. It's necessary. It's valuable. It's not frou-frou. It's nourishment.
Yeah, for sure. The interesting thing, I've covered a lot of different angles in journalistic ways. And the jazz world, the jazz community, especially the musicians, to me are the finest people in the world. And I say this because the higher up you go the food chain, the more humble they are, like a Sonny Rollins, all the way down. And the reason why I say this is because, just like you said, the thing that's so refreshing about being in this world is that you know that none of the quality is going to be compromised. Everybody's going to be wonderful human beings, and they're going to keep that torch going for the next generation. I mean, what a wonderful thing coming from a journalistic standpoint. And I talk about this sometimes with other people that aren't familiar with jazz, and they're like, "What are jazz musicians? What's the community like?" It's like they are the finest people on the planet. I am always so humbled and excited to be involved with these cats because it won't like, for instance, one of a little side note here. I remember when COVID happened, I had to decide what I was going to do. It was quite a time period. And I decided to interview more than ever. And I remember talking to Theo Hill, the pianist from New York City, and he sold everything and went to Costa Rica. And I was playing the interviews for my kids. They were teenagers at the time in the car. What else were you going to do? And he was in Costa Rica. He just became a surfer. There's macaws honking in the background, and he's talking about when he's going to get back to the music if he does. And I'm thinking, how cool is that? What a wonderfully refreshing Renaissance way of looking at this reality. Because he could go back to it any time, and that's the way the jazz world is. There's just this color, and there's this bountiful way that they roll that I don't think the rest of the world understands.
Well, you're probably right. I mean, I think it's sort of across the boards in the arts. People who are dedicated to their art will find a way to do it and to do it for their whole lives. One of the things that's great about jazz is we have elders
Yeah.
who really have been here doing this for decades, and they are interested in sharing their information promoting cross-generational work, and they're out there still doing it, and that has always impressed me. When I was a young guy getting into journalism, and I was listening to rock and roll and soul music and everything, as well as jazz, and I realized that the jazz musicians had a humility and were grounded in reality in a way that the pop and the rock musicians were not. And I had to go through so many acrobatics to get an interview with a big rock star who then would have attitude going into it.
Right.
Whereas if I wanted to talk to a jazz musician, basically it was two phone calls and I could be there and they would talk to me like, oh, I was young, but like I was a listener. I
Yeah.
was important to them.
Yeah. I remember one of the first interviews I landed. I started this in 2011. I remember Hubert Laws called me back. And I remember halfway through it, I was just like, oh my God, this guy doesn't know me from anything. I maybe released 10, 15 shows at the time, but he really was there and he was a genuine practitioner, really lending the story. I mean, even with Sonny Rollins and other people, and the beauty of talking to people like that is that they vibrate at a different level. Like Dr. Lonnie Smith, Randy Newman, they're like deities on this planet. And it's like you get away from them and it's like, oh my God, this is like a different kind of level of human, but they're still so humble and beautiful about what they do. And it's exactly what you said. You may have to go through a couple of channels, but at the end of the day, that's the serum. That's the golden beauty of this art form is that you get those people that are like that.
I agree. I mean, I've just had such fantastic experiences with Ornette Coleman, Freddie Hubbard, Keith Jarrett, uh, Dave Holland, Jack DeJohnette, even Miles. Not necessarily a beautiful, always wonderful guy, but I had a nice conversation with him, met him once, and it was a fairly normal. Sonny
For
Rollins,
Miles.
of course, is a wonderful guy, dear man,
Yeah.
a thinking person, a person who's interested in communicating directly. Betty Carter, I had a wonderful relationship with. She taught me so much um, about being indomitable and and being free on stage and directing her people. I mean, I could just see it. Cassandra Wilson, just so many musicians.
Yeah.
And the ones who are not so immediate and not so affable, I've learned a lot from them too. And
Sure.
even if they were mysterious, Cecil Taylor, hard nut to crack. Not somebody who you'd immediately get close to. But what a mind and what music created from that. And uh, I take those lessons and I try to apply them to my writing
Yeah.
or to organizing with the JJA, or to doing a project like the Jazz Omnibus, how to put it together, how to let the freedom that these contributors bespeak in their works, how to make those all fit into a book
Sure.
so
Totally.
that it's one volume, so that it reflects on itself and back and forth. And I think that we were successful. I mean, I'm very proud of this book. It's broad, it's not exhaustive, it's many people's points of view. It doesn't have an agenda, um, but I think it's revelatory. And I think that there's material in there for experts to argue about and for newcomers to discover. And I think that it gives a unique picture of the last 20 years of music in the jazz adjacent spheres.
Yeah.
And so, we get those ideas from how the musicians operate,
Yeah.
you know.
Totally. Take me back to your beginnings. Where were you born and raised? How did this dream of journalism and how did this love of jazz matriculate and evolve into you?
Well, I was born and raised in the south side of Chicago, and there was jazz music and R&B music, black music all around me, and I liked it. I mean, I came up, my parents were very encouraging of me and my brothers experimenting and tasting, investigating all the arts that were available to us. We had a piano. I gravitated to playing that. But I was always a writer. And my mom taught me how to type when I was in fifth grade because my handwriting was so bad. She thought that was because I had so much to say and I was in such a hurry to say it. So once I started typing, it was like, oh, I can get messages out that that seemed to have some official nature to it in some way. I had a newspaper of my own in fifth grade, typing out 14 copies of it and sending it out. And that really got me into journalism in a way. I love the newspapers. I like to uh, read the arts coverage in particular. And I wanted to be a writer, and it seemed like journalism was a practical way to do that. I
Yeah.
wasn't sure that my imagination would really cover me for writing fiction, for instance. Although I still write fiction, I enjoy it, and I've gotten better at it. But I was on my high school newspapers. I took a journalism course in high school. Uh, I was on my college newspaper, although I was an English major, not a communications major. Uh, I got my first job in journalism at the Chicago Daily News in 1973. I worked as a copy clerk. I became an editorial assistant on the city desk. I began to write overnight reviews of musical performances mostly, and some theater, some book reviews to movie review. But this was something that readers seemed to respond to in my writing,
Yeah.
and editors seemed to think that I had something to offer. I was willing to go places that other critics evidently didn't know about. And I felt strongly that there was exciting music going on in Chicago at that time, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, the AACM. And
Yeah.
I was fascinated by the Art Ensemble of Chicago and Henry Threadgill, Mulhall, Richard Abrams, Anthony Braxton. And they weren't getting written about much. And I kept saying, hey, this is happening. And University of Chicago students are flocking to it.
Yeah.
And there's a Black South Side audience. And I think we should be reporting on this. And they went, okay. And so I was able to write stories. And at the same time, I was interested in the blues. So I got to interview Muddy Waters, Mama Stella Yancey,
Wow.
um, and I was interested in reggae. So I interviewed Toots Hibbert, Earl Father Hines. I mean, it was all open to me. And I started writing for Downbeat around that time too, which
Yeah.
made it even more open. I also worked for Billboard at that time in the Chicago office and eventually moved to DC pursuing a romantic interest. And I tried to get some work there, which ended up being Washington Post and National Public Radio. And then I moved to New York City and got into it with the Village Voice and many other publications, just
Yeah.
as a freelancer trying to get as much work as I could get.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
So when you talk about this compilation of everybody singing their finest work, when you look back on this illustrious career that you've had in the jazz journalism world, what's the one piece for you that rises to the top?
Well, I've got to say I'm particularly proud of my book, Miles Ornette's Cecil, Jazz Beyond Jazz.
Yeah.
I don't think that anybody has grouped those three musicians together and looked at them as avatars of the avant-garde and what that means. What does avant-garde mean? It's not just like, oh, that was a period from 1961 to 1971. No, this is about music that is continually generative,
Yeah.
that has not just been co-opted or dismissed as we know what it does. It's music that still has mystery and excitement to it. And that can be music from 1300 or it could be music from 2025. So I tried to, in that book, depict the world that Miles, Ornette, Coleman, and Cecil Taylor all lived in. They were contemporaries. They all had interesting relationships with their mothers. They all went their own ways. Miles' section is about the world that he's living in and that they're all living in, what was happening in that era. The Ornette section focuses on him and the coterie of musicians that he developed. and how they worked as a unit, as sort of a creative troupe. And then the Cecil Taylor is more interior and like, what are we hearing here? How can we listen to this? What is someone who seems so opaque actually doing? What are they doing with the other musicians? So it was sort of a progression that way. To me, it has several levels. I think my writing is pretty good.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I That's what I'm proud of.
So let me ask you this. At the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, all of your readers, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. So, Howard, who are you? Who do you think you are?
What a hard question.
It's a therapy question.
I'm a writer. I'm a journalist. I like to gather people together and encourage them to do work. I like to hear what they have to say. I encourage people to listen. I want them to use their ears as well as their eyes in decoding this world. And I'm somebody who encourages openness to new experience and to thinking about artistic experience. What does it impact? What does it mean to listen to something? Are we just doing it to pass the time, or is it affecting our dispositions in some way and giving us clues about life in general? Uh, what are the operations here, and how do they manifest something greater than just what we see on the surface?
Well said. This wonderful collection, the Jazz Omnibus, 21st Century Photos and Writings. It is a wonderful collection. Where can people pick this up in the best way? How can they do it?
You can get these wherever books are sold, online, Amazon, Barnes and Noble are very good. Of course, the book is available in hardbound, paperback, and ebook form. The ebook you get immediately. The paperback and the hardcover, this is a print-on-demand publisher, so those books have to be ordered and then sent. That's why getting them from the bookstore is a little tricky. Some bookstores, especially specialty stores that focus on music, may have an inventory of these books. But if you go into the bookstore and you don't see it there, you have to ask for it and they'll
Sure.
order it for you.
Okay. Excellent. Howard, this has been a huge honor. Thank you, sir. I've seen your work. I've seen your name out so much. It's so great to catch up with you. Thank you for talking about this wonderful project. And I'm very soon, I don't know how I haven't done this. I need to get involved and become a JJA member. Being an independent guy, sometimes these things fly over my radar. So I feel like sometimes I'm catching up from Groundhog Day. So I will get in there and definitely be a part of it.
Please go to jjanews.org. That's our website. You can
Okay.
see membership or information there, and a lot of other stuff that the JJA does. We have a podcast. We have a series of photography salons that are archived on YouTube. We have a lot of activities that we're proud of doing. And thanks so much for having me on to talk about the Jazz Omnibus.
Yeah,
I've enjoyed it.
absolutely, man. Stay cool, man. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.
You too, Joe. Bye.
Cheers. Take care.